so we are very pleased to ask Johanna to please come forward and present your information on pre-incident training and collaboration as evidence in the aftermath of the Las Vegas shooting.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, actually, I'm going to finish my presentation with the Las Vegas shooting. But I have 18 minutes to give you 30 years of my history in disaster management and share some lessons learned, if this thing works. My first experience, my first introduction to disaster management, and many of you in the room perhaps were either very young or indeed not born, was in 1988 when Pan American Flight 103 departed from London en route to New York and then on to Detroit. 59 passengers on board, and crew members, of course. The flight was airborne for 40 minutes when it exploded over Scotland, a small town which the world came to know as Lockerbie. At the time, I was the corporate manager of Pan American's Employee Assistance Program based in the medical department. I'd come out of flying. I had a couple of friends on board. And I'll quote Adrian, I didn't know my arse from my elbow about crisis management. Love you. So everybody on board perished, including 11 people on the ground. So my boss, who was the medical director, said, go to London and Lockerbie. And I go, and do what? What am I supposed to do? I was a counselor at the time. I had a master's degree in therapy, and subsequently went on and did indeed get my doctorate in psychology. So anyway, that was my introduction to crisis management. Myself and multiple airline employees were dispatched to London and Lockerbie. It was a life-changing experience that broke my heart. But we all know, a broken heart is an open heart. And it was the catalyst that actually catapulted me into the field of disaster management. Jeff Mitchell is right. I thought, if I'm going to be in the aviation industry, and I have some incredible colleagues here from the aviation industry. We've been friends for multiple years, and we've learned from each other and shared and so on. And I want to honor them. You're sitting right here in front of me. So I decided that accidents are going to happen. And of course now we have multiple, not just air aviation, transportation, we have places of worship and so on. I said, if I'm going to be involved, I'm going to get people trained. Because I'm not going through this again. So the airline employees without appropriate training are dispatched to London Lockerbie, assigned to the families of the victims whose bodies are scattered all over the moors of Scotland. No training. So we all came back to, they did an outstanding job, by the way. We came back to New York or wherever we were based, and I personally was suffering from acute stress. Any New Yorkers here? A few. So I lived on 66th Street and First Avenue, and I came out to go to 2nd Avenue to get some stuff at the deli, which I know very, very well. I lived there for years. I came out of that deli, I didn't know which way to turn. And I knew I was in trouble. We didn't know, signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress or acute stress. We didn't have any of that. That was 1988. That's exactly a little over 30 years ago. So I was rather pissed off, shall we say, and I decided we're going to get these teams trained. So in fast forward, I've responded to, in addition to other airline crashes, I've responded also to 9/11, helping out airlines. And subsequently to that, I was asked to train the New York City Department of Transit Authority on CISM, which we did. So we've come a long way since 1988. But we are going to continue to be challenged And when we were looking for training, as you know, this is the 15th conference, so it's 30 years old, ICISF. ICISF was in its infancy. But we did get Jeff to come in and do some training for, whomever, the flight attendants and pilots and so on. But I figured out, who knows anything about crashes, mortuary, and so on? And we certainly didn't. So, because I, by the way, am also Irish and tenacious, I decided the US military, I didn't know the terminology. I didn't even know what department. So I found them. So any of you that are here from the military, thank you. I found the US military Department of Casualty and Mortuary Affairs. They invited us to the Pentagon. The colonel and his deputy came in to do the training. And they were extremely graphic. And I thought that I would lose some of the team, with their training. Because, I invested a lot of money on training these teams, and in comes the colonel and presented, what they do in the mortuary and so on. It was incredible training and very valuable training even to this day. Let me fast forward to what Jeff was talking about in the introduction. 1996, when TWA's Flight 800 was en route to Paris, I was the director of TWA's Employee Assistance Program and Disaster Response Management component, essentially in charge of the whole human factor aspect. 230 passengers and crew members were on board. Now here is the story, folks. 53 of those passengers were TWA employees, essentially family members. And it was hard for me to comprehend. How did this happen? How can that be? There was a deadheading, a positioning crew, which is another 17 people on a 747, 17 operating, and then crew members and family members on their vacation. So, at the time, because of my experience in Lockerbie, we had a very sophisticated team. But we were wise enough to know we needed help. And we got help. We already had 400 employees from TWA that were trained. We had them activated to take care of the family members, to help them navigate through that intense stage of grief. It is so essential. Not only navigate through the intense stage of grief, but they stay with the family until the family loved ones' remains are identified and repatriated, and they will fly with that family and either the cremains or the casket to the destination. Incredible experience. So many airlines showed up to help us. They're here, some of them: Aloha, Alaska, American, United, and several others, including Jeff Mitchell and the New York City Fire Department. Now, the New York City Fire Department, Doug Mitchell, who many of you may know, who's Jeff's brother, who was a lieutenant in the New York Fire Department, he actually looks like Adrian. He's a big teddy bear. And all the flight attendants fell in love with him. Or we all fell in love with him. Those firefighters and those airline individuals stayed with us for 2 to 3 weeks. So the firefighters came after 3 or 4 days and said, "Johanna, we need to go home now." I said, "What do you mean home?" "Oh, we were on our days off." They were on their days off. I said, "Who's your chief?" He said, "I'm a take-charge person." I said, "Who's your chief?" And I thought, if he's Irish, I'll put on the brogue. He's Dutch, Van Essen. You've seen him on TV recently. So I called the chief because Doug gave me the number. Called the chief. The chief, you know what he said? "How long do you need them? How long do you need them?" Think of what that does to our heart when we hear that. When, as I say, we're in the barrel. So let me share with you about my 30 years experience. And Jeff is right. I was very involved with the Las Vegas shooting. For those of you that were here last night, you heard me, saw me introduce the chief. And some of these are the lessons that we're learning. There has to be a systematic application of resources and coordinated handoff. And I am sick and tired of hearing lessons learned, lessons learned. Are we idiots? We have fire chiefs, we have police chiefs, we have military, we have you all here who are the experts. I don't mind learning lessons, but we don't need to learn the same lesson over and over again. A systematic approach, we actually, believe it or not, saw a wonderful system which was an ad hoc at TWA. When the teams came, the first thing we realized is we need a command center. We need a command center for the teams. So we all, and Jeff was with us, we all showed up at this room which became our command center, and I put a guy from Canadian Airlines in charge of the teams that came in from Aloha, Alaska, and a lot of them were pilots. And they were there, and they were going, well, we just work with pilots. I said, right? You'll work with whoever I ask you to work with. Right? Now these are captains. And so, I go, here's the deal. It is wonderful, because you know what? If something happens in one of our families, in our old traditions, the neighbors come in, because we are compromised. It's hard for us to be objective when our friends are on board. We'll do the best we can. So I told them, here's the deal, folks. I want you to go over to flight operations. I want you to go to flight service. I want you to go to the mechanics, and I want this, that, and the other thing. I said, I want to see asses and elbows out that door, and back in the evening at 8 to see what did you do, what help do you need. It was an incredible system that I have applied and taught, because I'm still teaching a lot, and I teach a lot in Las Vegas. We assign each team, each visiting team, an in-house team member to navigate the terrain. We gave them badges, made them part of the family. This allowed for a systematic handoff. It avoided confusion as who did what to whom, what department needed further attention. You all know in the aftermath of a disaster, one thing that we absolutely need to avoid is duplication of resources. And I can still see it happening. So it was extraordinary to see the seamless integration of the airline folks and indeed the New York City Fire Department. To this day, I have so much tenderness in my heart for all of them. And it's 1996, whatever that is, 23 years later. Now let me talk about Las Vegas. I had the honor of training over 200 first responders in the ICISF model throughout, they call it the Valley, believe it or not, in the Vegas. And you saw the chief last night describing, the territories, Henderson, this, that, and the other thing. When this shooting happened, I actually was in Dallas, Texas with American Airlines doing a presentation for them, but I knew I'd be back and talking to them. I also knew that wonderful teams are going to come in from around the country. And everybody is welcome, and welcome in a systematic way. They came from Florida, they came from New York, they came from Los Angeles, and several others. Now I want to emphasize one thing. When you come, or any of us come, to help a team, I call them the victim team, the local team. Let's be gracious enough to ask, what methodology are you using? This is not the time for discussion. You may have a better methodology, but please, this is not the time. Regrettably, some teams came to Vegas knowing that Vegas were using the ICISF methodology. It's a fledgling new team, and it caused a lot of confusion. As a matter of fact, some of the coordinators had asked them to step down, step back, and step sideways. So the similar methodology is so important. Great resources, you're absolutely welcome, you're absolutely needed, and we work with a similar methodology. So I had the opportunity for the first time in my 30-year career of, in addition to working with the first responders, I worked with the last responders, which is an agency that we're inclined to forget, and that is the coroners. Now that was a soul experience. It was wonderful, wonderful. I don't have time to get into it, but I'll be hanging around if you're interested. So, to summarize, you all have it. As a matter of fact, the fire departments, which we've been working with for 30 years, because they are the ones that, get us out of airplanes if we're, have incidents and so on. So I have, great respect for them. So a systematic approach. If we don't have a systematic approach, even if they are using a similar methodology, we have a potential to alienate the visiting teams. As a result of the shooting, Vegas, albeit they're in the embryonic phase of developing a master data system where CISM and mental health professional teams will report to this system, which is wonderful. All the out-of-towns, they'll report to the system. The departments, the fire departments, the police departments, the coroner departments, they'll have liaisons into the system. So they will know their needs, and the teams will be dispatched from the system. If you have better ideas, let me know, because we're in the embryonic phase, but I think it's a great plan. In the database, and this comes from my experience and all the airline experience with all my colleagues from the aviation. Las Vegas, as Chief Buchanan said last night, we get up to 45 million people a year as visitors. You're all in perhaps metropolitan areas. So I've learned the hard way from working in the airlines that we need the following. We need, of course, team credentials. We need language capabilities, because no matter how fluent you are in another language, when a death occurs, we speak with the language of the heart and the soul. We speak in our mother tongue. Religion is going to be in the database. If there's any Catholics here, even if you haven't been inside the door, that's my religion. You haven't been inside the door of a church for a long time. When something happens, you go back and you win. Religion, culture. What about burial rituals? We in the United States are, quite, even though, my God, we are such a multicultural country, we're rather myopic when it comes to burial rituals. And we found out the hard way with airlines sending big American caskets overseas. Do you realize the only place they fit are in American graves? So some of them were because they did that and they sent them to Tokyo. Some people in Tokyo followed the airline representatives around with machetes. And I said, good for them. Our problem. Our problem. So back to, we have over 30 years of collective experience in these rooms. And to collaborate and collate the experience, I've talked Jeff Mitchell and probably George Everly into developing and writing an anthology of our collective experience. So they'll be contacting some of you to participate in this. You've got to step it up to the table, Jeff. So, because, back to lessons learned and, oh yeah, but lessons learned. What about the new teams? We should have a manual to hand it over to them. This is what we've learned. Because I feel, and I'm very passionate, as you might have guessed, I'm very passionate about helping new teams, because some self-disclosure, I've been in this field for over 30 years, and I've been burned. I've made many mistakes, and have suffered the consequences. So my hope, in closing, is that by sharing our collective experience, we are not going to be repeating the same lessons learned over and over again. I believe it's our responsibility to protect the newcomers like they protect the new cadets in the fire department and the police department. Thank you for listening.